I'm David Hutchins with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, Egyptians take to the polls in historic elections. It's early, but we'll tell you who is poised to make political gains. How good is Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood on Twitter and Facebook, and are they changing minds? And how tough are the new sanctions adopted by the Arab League against Syria? It's all ahead on the Voice of America. Egyptians are casting their ballots in the first parliamentary election since a popular uprising ended the 30-year rule of former President Hosni Mubarak in February. Voters stood in long lines today, well before polling stations opened, suggesting a large turnout. Many said they were voting for the first time. By midday, there were no reports of foul play or violence, and thousands of Egyptian judges are monitoring the process. The staggered polls to elect Parliament's lower house began in the main cities of Cairo and Alexandria, as well as 7 other provinces. A runoff for those areas is scheduled for December 5th. Egypt's 27 provinces are voting in 3 separate rounds in a process that concludes in January of next year. Elections for the upper house will then take place ending in March, after which the assembly will write a new constitution. Now, joining me on the line is our Cairo correspondent, Elizabeth Arrett, who's been watching election events today. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Hutch.
So what has been the mood at some of the polling stations?
Well, given this huge process which you just described, it is kind of amazing. So many people have turned out, and there have been very, very long lines stretching around blocks, around corners. It goes on forever. But people have been, for the most part, very patient. Some places are a little chaotic. Ballots have been late to show up, but it doesn't seem to be any malevolent type of action. It's just trying to get this all done. Everyone's very excited and waiting patiently just so that they can get their voices heard.
Now, Egypt had parliamentary elections late last year in 2010 when Hosni Mubarak was still in power. And at the time, human rights groups said when it concluded, it was one of the most fraudulent votes in Egypt's history and one of the most fraudulent votes in the world. Mubarak's gone now, of course, and there's no report of intimidation at the polls. But is there any chance that the results can be tainted in any way?
Well, not the physical tainting that you had before, just the straight-out ballot box stuffing and that kind of just manipulation of numbers. One thing that people are concerned in terms of tainted would be that because members of the old government were allowed to run or came in sort of sideways into this election in many ways and obviously had a lot of backing behind them in terms of just experience and how to get out and support, as well as the established opposition, including the Muslim Brotherhood. They're very well organized. So some of these new voices that led the revolution, they're feeling a bit excluded, that this came very quickly, and they just aren't as organized on the ground as some of these other groups.
Now, you mentioned the Brotherhood, and of course their Freedom and Justice Party is expected to do well as these election stages unfold. Does their ascendancy in a parliament mean that the SCAF could become more entrenched, or could SCAF maybe accelerate presidential elections, which they said they're going to do now, in order to have an executive that could maybe check a Brotherhood-dominated parliament?
Well, that's a very good question. They've been sort of dancing around each other throughout this, especially in the last 10 days when we've seen these uprisings, the new protests in Tahrir Square, where you have the Brotherhood appearing to come to the side of the SCAF, of the Military Ruling Council, and then getting a lot of flack for that, and then they're moving off and saying, no, we're not supporting them. So there has been this kind of alliance between the two of them. Whether it can hold up over the long haul, they have very different visions of the future. We'll just have to wait and see.
Elizabeth Arrett reporting to us from Cairo. Thank you very much.
It's so, yeah.
Now, as Elizabeth mentioned, the Muslim Brotherhood is considered likely to be the biggest beneficiary of Egypt's first post-revolution elections. But the Brotherhood has an image problem. It is considered too radical by some abroad and too accommodating by some at home. Elizabeth followed one candidate campaigning in Cairo as he tried to give voters a fuller picture of what the Muslim Brotherhood's all about.
If it's a politician's goal to appeal to the widest base, then Muslim Brotherhood candidate Amr Zaki is very good at his job. His core issue, unsurprisingly, is Islam. Islam as the center of all things political, economic, and social. It's all-encompassing, he repeats to the crowd gathered in this working-class Cairo district. Islam is all-encompassing. But the man some fear represents a step backward for women and religious minorities shares the stage at this rally with a female community organizer and a neighborhood Christian priest. Your church, he tells the priest in welcome, is valued by us as much as our mosques. And as a counterpoint to Western fears of an Islamist ascendancy after the Arab Spring, Zaki switches to English with a message of pragmatism for the foreign media in the front row.
In first priority in our proceed in party, how we can build the Egyptian people.
Zaki, an urban planner with business interests abroad, combines what many people here in Egypt seem to want: middle-class prosperity. He outlines housing developments, industrial centers, new hospitals, while retaining a deep religious faith. It's an accommodating stance that appeals to many in the voting district, a warren of crowded, narrow streets where children run with abandon and a goat wanders looking for a meal. Resident Wael Lofty is an English teacher and a Brotherhood supporter.
They are very moderate, okay, and they can accept all the currents, and they can accept all the groups of the society, okay, and they have a very good program.
The question is, will they stay that way? Longtime dissident and political analyst Hisham Qasim says most political forces don't think so.
In the past, Mubarak's opposition, where I come from, did not trust the Brotherhood. Okay, because of their track record in reneging on deals, and once they're in a position of power, their discourse changes completely, okay, and their attitude in negotiations.
The accusation of opportunism has cropped up again in recent days in the Brotherhood's dealings with the ruling military council, some say at the expense of its opponents on Tahrir Square. It's a charge Zaki dismisses.
There is no relation between us and the army. This is not true.
And while the Brotherhood has been largely missing from the latest round of demonstrations, Zaki expresses support for the protesters.
I give a good attention and appreciate their efforts in Tahrir. And they understand the Muslim Brotherhood going to put the effort in right direction.
Analyst and publisher Qasim says that with all its promises, the Brotherhood has stretched itself too thin.
I don't think that the Brotherhood will have a very impressive performance in the elections. I think they'll end up with more seats as a party, but not enough to form a government, and nobody will enter a coalition with them.
But on one thing, both Qasim and Zaki agree. Elections are the only way forward.
The election is a good chance for our country. We need to proceed with it, to finalize it. We need to proceed to finalize this part of our history.
Whatever the Brotherhood's future direction, for this election, Zaki has embraced the spirit of the process. Elizabeth Barrett, VOA News, Cairo.
And joining me now on the line is correspondent Rebecca Collard, who just wrote a story for our Arab Spring social journalism site, Middle East Voices. And the story was about the Muslim Brotherhood and their efforts to get out the vote online and use social media to mobilize their constituents. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi.
So the first question I wanted to ask you is, how engaged was the Muslim Brotherhood on Twitter and Facebook before the events of the Tahrir Revolution when they began in January, February of this year?
Well, when I spoke to their representative a couple of days ago, one of the things that she stressed, and I think this is really true, is that the Muslim Brotherhood have always had an online presence. So they had these two websites, an English one and an Arabic one, and a lot of this was because of the fact that they were not permitted in Egypt to have a print publication. So they had these websites, and these websites were a source of information, maybe, and messaging, reporting what they felt were human rights abuses, criticizing the regime. But what the key change has been in the last few months, and she pointed this out specifically, was the fact that what they're doing now is engaging. So previously, these sites might have just been a source of kind of messaging and information. And what you've seen, especially in these last few weeks, is on the English account specifically, you've seen people launching criticism against the Muslim Brotherhood and them responding via tweet immediately, within minutes. And I think this is a very interesting thing. And one thing that she said to me is as far as the Arabic account goes, this is something that they're starting to do more, but this is something that has really started with their English websites.
Last question. What have they been advising their constituents to do in the past week leading up to the elections? Has there been a lot of make sure you make it to the polls language? Has there been a lot of, go out to Tahrir, stay away from Tahrir?
so they have come under, specifically on Twitter, I think in social media, they've come under a lot of criticism for not calling their supporters to Tahrir Square. Now, there was one exchange, and I write about this in the article, and I think it's very interesting. People are saying to them online, "Why aren't you in Tahrir Square? Where are you?" And then this one of their Twitter followers they were engaging with online said, these people in Suez and these people are breaking with Muslim Brotherhood ranks and going to Tahrir Square anyway, trying to say that the supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood were dissenting against the Muslim Brotherhood's call for its supporters not to demonstrate in Tahrir Square. And they responded really quickly, saying online on Twitter, saying, we never said people can't go. We're not going as an organized group, but that their constituents and their party members can do whatever they like. And I think that the reason that they're not calling people to the square is this: they are really prioritizing the polls. I think they know, most people know, that the Muslim Brotherhood are going to do, their political party will do very well in the coming weeks, in the coming months in the polls. So for them, that is really a priority, I think, over going to Tahrir Square.
That's Rebecca Collard, Middle East correspondent based in Ramallah in the West Bank. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thank you.
Are you following the uprisings in Syria, Egypt, and other Arab Spring countries? Want to contribute? Voice of America has launched a new social journalism website for the Arab Spring called Middle East Voices. Incubated by our thousands of fans on Facebook and Twitter and dedicated journalists at VOA, this site takes a new approach to covering the region through investigative journalism, publishing your viewpoints and harnessing social media to tell stories in a new, innovative way. Become a contributor at MiddleEastVoices.com.
The European Union plans to impose more sanctions on the embattled government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad over its crackdown on protesters. The EU and the United States already have sanctions in place against Syria, and EU foreign ministers will vote Thursday to further restrict trade and economic dealings with Damascus. The news of the sanctions came as tens of thousands of Syrians protested on Monday against unprecedented economic sanctions imposed by the Arab League on Sunday. Now, Edward Uranian has more on the Arab League's bold moves from Sunday in a report from Cairo.
19 of 22 Arab League foreign ministers voted to impose the sanctions on Syria. The sanctions include a freeze on the assets of Syrian leaders in all Gulf Arab states, an end to Arab investment and trade with Syria, a halt to dealings with Syria's central bank, and a ban on travel by Syrian officials to Arab states. The Arab League's point man for Syria, Qatari Foreign Minister Hamid Ben Jassim Ben Jaber Al Thani, said the vote to impose sanctions will have its desired effect, even if the sanctions are never applied, so long as Syria ultimately agrees to stop targeting civilians.
أنا أعتقد أنه القرار ساري سينفذ. نأمل أنه لا
Arab foreign ministers will hold a follow-up meeting in 1 week to reevaluate the effects of the sanctions and whether they need to be prolonged. Observers say that Syria could still decide to agree to the Arab League plan within the coming week to have sanctions lifted. Sheikh Hamid expressed frustration over the long political discussions, stressing that the Arab League could keep discussing the matter for another year and issuing new decrees, but that the Syrian people would continue to die. Arab League head Nabil al-Arabi told journalists that extra care would be taken to see that the new economic sanctions would not hurt the Syrian people or neighboring states.
وأخذا في الاعتبار الآثار الاجتماعية المترتبة على توقيع العقوبات.
The Syrian economy is already reeling from the convulsion of the 8-month-old popular uprising, along with economic sanctions imposed by the European Union and the United States. Al Arabiya TV reported that the League's decision to freeze the assets of Syrian officials in the Gulf states is the sanction most likely to pressure Damascus. Syrian leaders reportedly have few assets in either Europe or the U.S., but large sums invested in the Gulf. Edward Uranian for VOA News, Cairo.
For more on what the last few days' events mean for Syria, we've turned to Michael Lippin, who covers Middle East issues for VOA. Here's his interview with Salman Sheikh, the director of the Brookings Doha Center in Doha, Qatar, about the Arab League sanctions.
Well, I think the most effective measure will be the halting transactions through the Syrian central bank. This will cut, of course, the money lifeline that businesses have to trade with the Arab world in particular. We have to remember that half of the Syrian trade is with the Arab world, and a quarter of all of Syria's imports come from the Arab world. So this will have I think, if they are enforced, a very big impact. And then the particular focus on individuals within the government and the regime in terms of travel bans and asset freezes, these are important, of course, because politically these sanctions are designed to isolate the regime, but also to tell those within the regime that time is running out for them. So it will have a demonstrative effect, particularly inside Syria, with those elements who may not be targeted, but who may be next, particularly on the security side, and the business cronies who have been supporting the regime's coffers and, in fact, have been supporting the Shabiha sort of thugs, the security thugs, who have been doing a lot of the human rights violations that we're hearing about in Syria.
So how do you think these Arab League sanctions are going to compare to the measures that have already been taken against Syria by the United States and European Union?
Well, they will be significant. But in terms of their effectiveness, I think we shouldn't get carried away at this stage. There are at least 3 countries which border Syria, which are, of course, Iraq, Lebanon, and even perhaps Jordan, who would find it difficult to fully impose these kinds of sanctions. Again, what is more important is the significance and the example of these sanctions. This is the first time in the 66-year history of the Arab League that the Arab League is passing these kind of punitive economic and political sanctions on any member state. And we have to bear in mind this is not any member state. This is one of the 6 founding members of the Arab League, and a Syria which has always championed pan-Arabism. So to exclude Syria, in effect, from the Arab nation through this way, I think it will have probably the biggest effect on the situation. It will also open the door to more multilateral sanctions and bilateral sanctions. We will likely see Turkey follow suit. And that also, I think, action will move quite quickly to the UN Security Council to try and pass these measures in a binding UN Security Council resolution, as well as through other measures.
That was Salman Sheikh, the director of the Brookings Doha Center in Doha, speaking with our reporter Michael Lippin. Pakistan has ordered the United States to move out of an airbase on its territory after shutting down NATO's 2 main overland supply routes into Afghanistan. Popular anger is mounting in Pakistan after NATO's killing of 24 Pakistani military personnel in a cross-border airstrike on Saturday.
Reports appearing in the British Guardian newspaper and the U.S. Wall Street Journal angered Pakistani military leaders Monday by citing unnamed Afghan and Western sources as saying it was Pakistan that fired first. Major General Attar Abbas is a spokesman for Pakistan's armed forces. This is not true. They are making up excuses, he says. Then he adds, by the way, what are their losses, their casualties? NATO helicopter gunships and jet fighters based in Afghanistan are said to have fired on 2 Pakistani military posts in the Mohmand region near the Afghan border on Saturday, killing 24 soldiers. Major General Abbas says the assault lasted nearly 2 hours. Colonel Gary Kolb is a spokesman for the U.S.-led International Security Assistance Force, or ISAF, in Afghanistan. He would neither confirm nor deny the reports suggesting Pakistan fired first, and said it is too early to speculate on what happened.
We're going to let the investigation run its course. That's the purpose of the investigation, is to get all the facts, and it's got the highest priority of the commander of ISAF right now. We want to make sure we're clear on what occurred during the incident.
Public anger in Pakistan over the killings is high. Islamabad has ordered the United States to vacate a Pakistan air base it uses and has indefinitely closed the 2 main overland routes NATO uses to send non-lethal supplies to Afghanistan. Senior leaders in Pakistan, under domestic pressure to take a strong stand, say they are completely reevaluating the terms of engagement with the United States. Still, experts say Pakistan needs the billions of dollars it receives annually from Washington as much as the U.S. needs Pakistan's help in pursuing militants. making a serious long-term downturn in the relationship unlikely. Pakistan's main ally, China, expressed its hope Monday for a thorough and properly handled investigation. Hong Lei is a spokesman at the Foreign Ministry in Beijing. Hong says China was deeply shocked by the incident and expresses strong concern for the victims and profound condolences for Pakistan. Kurt Asian, VOA News, Islamabad.
Iraqi officials say a suicide bomber has exploded a vehicle outside a prison near Baghdad, killing 19 people and wounding at least 22 others. The blast happened today at the entrance of the Al-Hut prison in the town of Taji. Authorities say the dead include at least 10 security personnel and several civilian workers. Violence has declined across Iraq since the sectarian conflict peaked in 2006 and 2007, but deadly attacks remain common as U.S. troops prepare to leave the country at the end of this year. With Christmas approaching, one of the holiest sites in Christianity will be getting a facelift. Robert Berger reports from the VOA Bureau in Jerusalem.
The Palestinian Authority plans to renovate the 1,500-year-old Church of the Nativity in the West Bank town of Bethlehem, the traditional birthplace of Jesus. The most urgent repair is on the leaking wooden roof that has ruined many of the church's priceless mosaics and paintings. There also is a danger that the rotting beams could fall on tourists below. The roof has not undergone major repairs in more than 500 years because of a feud among the three Christian denominations that control the church: the Catholics, Greek Orthodox, and Armenians. But in the spirit of goodwill for Christmas, they put their differences aside. Palestinian Tourism Minister Khulud Daibas.
The Palestinian Authority has taken the lead. Our president has issued a decree to restore the roof and to prepare for the restoration of the church on behalf of the three churches and in coordination with the three churches, which obviously cannot do it on their own.
The Church of the Nativity is the Palestinian Authority's top tourist attraction, with some 2 million visitors a year. The renovations will cost $10 to $15 million and will be funded by the Palestinian government and international donors. But in the Holy Land, religion is never far from politics. The renovations are part of a Palestinian effort for statehood recognition at the United Nations, a move opposed by the United States and Israel, who say a Palestinian state can only be achieved through negotiations. Palestinian officials say the restoration of a site of global importance should demonstrate to the world that their government is a responsible steward of the holy places. Robert Berger for VOA News, Jerusalem.
And finally, Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan's office says that he has undergone a successful operation for an intestinal problem. A statement from the Prime Minister's office on Monday said he was in good condition after having a laparoscopic surgery on his digestive system on Saturday. The statement was the first indication by the government that the 57-year-old Erdogan had undergone the minimally invasive surgery. He says he will rest before returning to work. There were no further details to his condition. This has been VOA's Middle East Monitor. Join us Monday through Friday for news from the region and of interest to the region. Coming up on International Edition, Chinese internet users are questioning their country's donation of school buses to Macedonia. We'll explain why, and check out MiddleEastVoices.com for all Arab Spring news. Thanks for tuning in to Voice of America.
VOA Middle East is building an online network of reporters, bloggers, and citizen journalists called VOA Middle East Voices, and it's only on Facebook. You're invited to send us news tips or submit your own story ideas. Post links to underreported stories on our wall and participate in ambitious citizen journalism campaigns. Simply go to Facebook and search VOA Middle East Voices. Join the conversation.